It's a pleasure to be here tonight because I would like to do a special welcome to Dr. Philip Rodneyhoff. Something similar, wasn't it? I've been practicing. It doesn't flow easy from my tongue, but that's okay. But welcome, Dr. Philip, and also Mandy as well. Mandy is his better half, or his wife, and you've come from Brisbane, haven't you?
Gold Coast.
Gold Coast.
Southern Gold Coast.
Oh, I'm going to get him to get up and tell us a little bit about where he's come from. Actually, I was just saying to Dr. Philip, I did stalk him prior to him coming here, and I did notice that you were a GP at Rabina. Was, yes. Yes. Not there now. No. Because, yeah. So, all right, I just want to tell you how tonight's going to go. So we've got 3 sessions. So tonight is the first of the 3, and it's living for total health. Now, we all need total health, right? Yeah? Hang on. Yes, we do. So tonight, after tonight's session, we do have hot drinks in the hall. Now, you all know where the hall is, and if you don't know, just follow the lead. And there'll be hot drinks out there. It'll give you an opportunity to talk to Dr. Philip, and after his session, he's going to have some question and answers, so you can actually connect with him and put your questions to him so that he might be able to help us to be more informed about living healthy, longer lives. And tomorrow is the next session, which will be at 11 o'clock tomorrow, and followed by a lunch. Then at 2:30 there's a 3rd session, which is the final session, and so we hope that you'll be able to attend those and come along and enjoy the opportunity to learn something about our health and well-being. So can I ask you to come and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great. Good evening, everyone. Great. Well, thank you, Barb, for your very warm introduction. It's actually scary, isn't it? Have you guys ever Googled yourself and your names and what's out there? So yeah, yes, I'm seeing some hand signals that sometimes it's not the greatest thing, but yeah, you would have discovered all sorts of interesting things there, Barb. But no, look, my background is, I am in general practice. On a part-time basis, and I was at a practice at Rabina. In fact, I've been at practices all around Brisbane and the Gold Coast as well. Currently, I'm working predominantly in aged care, and so there are several aged care facilities where I actually have my own residents who I look after, but take a very active interest in wider aspects of health as well. In fact, my training is in general practice, so I have my fellowship in general practice. I also have my fellowship with the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine. Also have my graduate certificate in nutritional and environmental medicine through Swinburne University. So look, the whole area of health and preventative health and lifestyle health and living well and living longer is something that really interests me. In addition to that, look, I have done some other things. Actually, I grew up in Sydney. Anyone here from Sydney originally? Okay, we've got a few, actually quite a few. This is good. You feel emboldened. Once you see 3 or 4, there's 5 or 6 hands, and that's great. Yeah, so I grew up in Sydney. Attended Macquarie University initially after school. I became a science teacher, so I taught physics and general science at Kalara High School in Sydney. Now, Kalara High School, its main claim to fame, at least in those days, was that one of its very well-known alumni or graduates was Elle Macpherson. Well, I guess I didn't have to say any more because most people have heard of her. Now, she wasn't there when I was there, but many of the teachers who were there had taught her. And so, anyway, that's the school I taught at. And then I did my medical training. Then, at the same time, I also was interested in religious areas, so I actually got my Master of Arts in Religion as well. And tomorrow, fascinating topic about belief in God and health. Is there a connection? Because it's actually fascinating the amount of peer-reviewed literature that is available now, only in very recent years, that is looking at this connection and how important it is towards our total health. And that's actually what we want to look at, is total health. And so tonight's topic is, and here it is, the next slide, key steps you can take today to add quality years to your life. Now, I do like the word quality, because sometimes what happens, people say, well, look, I don't want to add an extra few years when I'm, at the end and I'm feeling sick and I'm in pain and, look, life is actually pretty tough going. What sort of attraction is that to have more of those years where I might be suffering? Well, look, I'm not actually talking about those. Now, having said that, I think there are things that we can do that will help even in that situation. But there are also things that we can do now. We can do at any age that can make a difference to our health span as well as our lifespan. So, and I distinguish between the two. Health span is how long we continue in good health, ideally until we get to very old age. And then you don't want the diseases of old age until you get very old. Ideally, you don't want them at all. But if you have to have them, well, you want to postpone it as long as possible. And if there's some things we can do on the way to actually make those less of an issue or even manage them well, of course we want to do that as well. But you know what? There's things we want to do as well that can add years to our life. The good news is, and I'm going to share with you this evening, some powerful studies that actually show some things that we can do that can actually add quality years to our life. All right, the question, what is health? Now, I know we've been speaking about total health, and Barb certainly mentioned that. See, when we think of health, very often we think of the physical. And the physical is very good, but it's not the only thing. Because we also have the mental, the emotional, the social, and the spiritual. And so what we know is that every one of those actually contributes. See, all of those elements are a part of what we call total health. Now, the medical literature is very clear that each one of these impacts each one of the others. And in fact, there are medical journals now which actually look at the interdisciplinary areas and look at these and highlight how each of these can actually impact on the others. And so it's great to have physical health, and that's good. But you know what, in terms of total health, we want to have the other ones. And the same, we might only have, for example, social health, and that's wonderful, but it's good to have the other ones too. Now, so Forever Young, Time magazine, a couple of different covers that it's had over the years, and people want to, of course, they want to stay young, and they want to stay young for as long as possible, for forever, ideally. And as medical science gives us more answers, you know what, we may not be able to achieve, at least on this side of eternity, the forever young, but the point is there are things that we can do to stay young. Now, there was a fascinating study that came out only 2 years ago, so 2024, and it was in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And it's entitled The Impact of 8 Lifestyle Factors on Mortality and Life Expectancy Among United States Veterans. And it's called the Million Veteran Program. And it actually showed, it was data from it was just over 250,000 people. So, okay, we're talking about a big study. So they looked at 250,000 people, and so it was over 1 million person years of actual follow-up. And these were people who were aged between the ages of 40 and 99. Okay, so we're talking about a decent lifespan there, a decent age range, from up to even 99 years of age. They followed these people in the study. And so they analysed 8 lifestyle factors, and they found that each positive lifestyle factor had a cumulative effect. So what does that mean? That if you did one of these lifestyle factors, it added years to your life. If you did 2 of them, it added more years to your life, and so on. So each one gave an additional benefit. So obviously, it's good to do 1 rather than none, but it's better to do all 8 if you can possibly do it, because then it's going to give you the best outcome. Now, the question is, look, how much of a difference did these 8 lifestyle factors make? Was it a few days? Was it a couple of months? Are we talking about something that, could you even add a few extra years to your life? Well, let's have a look. Let's say that someone started at the age, so someone who followed all 8 of these habits compared to someone who followed 0 of the habits. Now, if they started at the age of 40, well, females would have an additional 20 years and males 24 years difference in life expectancy from starting at the age of 40 if they followed all 8 of these habits, if they followed none of those habits. Now that's pretty impressive. What do you reckon? I reckon it definitely is. So look, there's something to this. Well, hang on, look, you'd rather do these than not do these because, hey, these actually do make a difference. And they followed, over 250,000 people to get to these conclusions. Well, what about if you're not 40 anymore? You say, well, look, that's great, but I'm not 40 anymore. Well, what if you started at 50? Well, from 50, females still get, 18 years difference, and the males get 21. So it's dropped a little bit, but not that much. It still makes a massive difference. Well, what if you start at 60? Well, for females, it's still 18 years, and males, it's 16 years. So the point is, that is the difference in life expectancy for someone who does all 8 of those habits, starting from that age, versus someone who doesn't. Isn't that amazing? Well, I'm going to show you this graph. This shows it. I won't dwell on it, but this is the prolonged life expectancy. You can see from 0 up to 25 years, so there. And these are the number of the low-risk lifestyle factors from 0 right up until 8. And you can see this is for the 40-year-old male. Okay, so each additional one added extra life expectancy up to that total of 24 years. Now, there's another graph which I like even better, and I'll explain this one. And that is, this is the prolonged life expectancy again from 0 to 25. And this is the estimated prolonged life expectancy at different ages by applying the low-risk lifestyles. Now, so if someone is 40, you can see if they do one factor, well, that's about the 3.5 years. And so each additional one you do adds to the life expectancy. And so we looked at it 50 and 60. But what happens if someone's 70? Well, you can see, on this graph, we can look and we can extrapolate it. So if we go up there to where the 8th one is and we go across, we can still see, in this case, it's somewhere around, 14, 15 years difference in life expectancy. And even at, say, 95, you can see that it's going to make a difference. Even if someone's 95, if you go across, the difference, well, it might only be 5 years, but still that might be quite significant if you're 95, isn't it? 5 years difference if you follow all the habits rather than don't. Now, does that mean if you're 100, you need to give up? No, of course it doesn't, because the study only followed people up to 99 years of age. Now, if they had enough people who are 100 or more and they were part of the study, my guess is that they would find that these people would actually have some benefit as well. It's just that we don't have the data. We can only work with the data that we have. All right, so that's good. Now, of course, probably at this stage you're asking, what are these 8 lifestyle habits? Because, are these something that are really hard and you've got to run a marathon every second month or something? I mean, not that I would recommend that, by the way. Are these things that are doable or not doable? Well, let's have a look. And we're going to spend a bit of time on these. In fact, we'll briefly go through them, and then I want to go through them in more detail. Well, the first one is nutrition. Now, some of these aren't surprising. You know what? The reason they're not surprising is because most of us know a lot of these principles anyway. It's just that we've had a study that actually gives us numbers of years of difference it actually makes. So nutrition is a very important one. Now, the next one is physical activity. Now, we're going to talk about that because notice I didn't put exercise. You put exercise, people run away. Well, actually, that's funny. They don't really run away, but they don't like the word exercise, do they? Restorative sleep is the third one. Now, notice the word restorative, because I guess everyone has to sleep. If you don't sleep, you're in big trouble. So everyone sleeps something. But you actually want good sleep, quality sleep, restorative sleep. The next one, never smoking. Now, look, that's probably not a surprise. Now, but I want to emphasise this, that if someone has smoked in the past, or even if they're smoking now, look, if you're smoking now, by all means, please consider whatever you can, get some help, talk to a professional, stop. The evidence is very clear on that. But if someone has smoked, it doesn't mean you need to somehow despair. The point is that by having quit, you then develop additional health over time you restore your health, okay? So the point here is now, look, if there's been a lot of damage done, you may not be able to get it back to baseline, but the earlier you stop, then the more chance there is that you can undo. Certainly the further damage shouldn't occur, but you can, by doing good lifestyle, actually reverse some of the damage if it's not permanent. Okay, but the never smoking is the one that they use in this category. The next one is no excessive alcohol consumption. It's interesting, I'll share some data later that talks about alcohol and what the studies now, even I've got one from July 2026. Can you get much more recent than that? Okay, July 2026, coming up a little bit later, and the recommendation now is that if someone doesn't drink, not to start. In fact, to minimise it as much as possible, and ideally none at all. But look, I'll come to some of that material a little bit later. But in this case, in this study, it was a no excessive alcohol consumption. No opioid use disorder. Look, that one, remember, this was a study of veterans. So that, in that population, this would be a much, perhaps a bigger problem than the general population, but nevertheless, it was one of those factors, no opioid use disorder. Next one is social connections. I was surprised when I looked into this how much research there is coming out just very recently in the last few years, recent research that emphasises the importance. Now, it's just not any social connections. I mean, we're talking about positive social connections. We're not talking about toxic social connections. They're not necessarily the ones that are going to give you good health and long health. But we want to emphasise community, and we want to emphasise positive social connections. Very strong evidence there. The next one is stress management. Now, of course, this group here, living in a lovely place like Hervey Bay, you guys wouldn't know what stress is, would you? Yes, no, I don't know. I'm getting a mixed reaction. Some people, I think, think they're in an idyllic paradise. There's no stress here, but other people kind of are shaking their heads. And no, look, I think that's part of the human condition at the moment. We're all under some stress, some of us under a lot of stress, and managing stress is important. So, if we do that well, then it contributes to us living longer. If we do it badly, well, unfortunately, accelerates our ageing. So, they're the 8. Look, I don't know, were there any surprises in that? Well, that's a relatively common sense list. What do you think? There's nothing like really left field that's startling in that. Well, now we want to delve into some of the detail, because that's what's really interesting. That's where what does the research really say, and how can we apply it? Well, the first of them is nutrition. A lovely picture of some vegetables and fruit we got at a market not so long ago, and I searched the internet for a picture of good fruits and vegetables, and I couldn't find anything I liked, so I thought, well, good. So Mandy went to the local markets, the growers markets, and we put it on the kitchen table, and I think that's as good a picture as any. Anyway, I feel good when I look at that picture. So that's the nutrition. Now, this was a study, it only came out last year, and it's a review article, Dietary Patterns for Health Span and Longevity. Love that term, health span, it's used in the literature now. A comprehensive review of nutritional strategies promoting lifelong wellness. Now, we could go through a lot, but I'm not, because we've got so much material to cover. We haven't got that long in the big scheme of things. But it did say that the pursuit of longevity has long been central to nutritional science, with growing evidence underscoring the profound influence of dietary patterns on lifespan and overall health. Now, again, it's probably not rocket science. It's not really telling us anything we don't know. But what's really good to see is that in the latest research literature, this is in there, and it's so strongly in there. It talks about the profound influence of dietary patterns on lifespan and overall health. There's no question that what we eat makes a huge difference. It's unfortunate that when we go into our local supermarkets, that too often we find stuff that actually isn't promoting our lifespan and our health span, and we've got to be really careful. And so, because we're bombarded with so much advertising, indeed so much food and so many outlets that aren't supermarkets but are fast food, if we're not careful, we can end up in a pattern where we end up eating a bunch of stuff that actually is not helping us at all. It's actually accelerating our ageing. So this is known, but we're surrounded by an environment that tempts us and pulls us towards a certain way that too often is not great for our health. Well, what was interesting at the start of this year, now every 5 years in the United States, they put out dietary guidelines for Americans. They update it every 5 years. And this got updated in January this year. Anyone seen this particular updating guidelines? All right, we've got one taker at least. We've got a second, third taker. Now, this is, anyway, great. I'm not an auctioneer, but if I did, I could keep going and maybe we'd get half a dozen or 8 or 10. But anyway, I guess everyone can say they've seen it now. Now, dietary guidelines. Now, it actually started off with a really, quite unusual for health authorities to come out with so strongly worded statements. And so this said the United States is amid a health emergency. Nearly 90% of healthcare spending goes to treating people who have chronic diseases. Many of these illnesses are not genetic destiny, they are the predictable result of the standard American diet. Now, we could put in standard Australian diet there if we wanted to, it's very close. A diet which over time has become reliant on highly processed foods and coupled with a sedentary lifestyle. Now, it goes on, it says the consequences have been devastating. More than 70%, get this, 70% of the American adults are overweight or obese. Nearly 1 in 3 American adolescents between the ages of 12 and 17 has pre-diabetes. I don't know about you guys, but look, when I was growing up, diabetes, that was an old person's disease, right? Then when I finished medical school, well, you heard of some people in middle age getting it, maybe in their 30s. Now we're talking about adolescents getting pre-diabetes between the ages of 12 and 17. So it's not as if our nutrition is better. I think in many ways it's worse, wasn't it, than a generation ago. So, it is. I think these guys in America are onto something. It is a health emergency. Now, these guidelines mark the most significant reset of federal nutrition policy in our nation's history. And it's summarised. There's one sentence and it summarises. Now, and this is, in some ways, you'd be amazed at the simplicity, but also how profound it is. Now, what's the sentence? It says, the message is simple, eat real food. And I don't know, it seems, it seems obvious, but it seems amazing that, after, I guess, decades of going on all sorts of different pathways, we've actually come back to this principle, eat real food. Now, why does that make sense? Well, look, here's a diagram of the human cell, very complex. But the point is, it's actually very simple in one sense. Okay, if we have healthy cells, we're more likely to have healthy bodies because our body is made of cells. Now, with a cell, what does it need? It needs quality nutrients in, and you don't want the toxins or you don't want the rubbish in, right? So you want the good stuff in, you don't want the bad stuff in. I know can't make it simpler than that. There is one other aspect. You want the waste product or the bad stuff that is generated in the cell because as a byproduct, you want it to get out of the cell. If you do that, it's really straightforward. If you do that, you know what? Your cells can be healthy. But the problem is, what do? We eat the stuff that actually, well, first of all, we don't have enough nutrition, so the vitamins, the minerals, the phytonutrients, all the really beneficial stuff we don't get enough of because we've got highly processed foods where this stuff's taken out. And then the stuff we do eat, it's got all the different additives and it's got all the often unhealthy fats and the sugars and the processed stuff which actually helps to gum up the works and our cells don't work that well. So it makes sense. We want healthy nutrition. At the same time, we want to be able to eliminate the toxins. But in the simplest sense, that's why we want good nutrition. Okay, now the really sad thing, and this was not from this year's, but from the previous 5 years, this was a dietary intake compared to recommendations in the United States for those who were, ages 1 and older, who were below or at each dietary goal. What's that mean? So this is the dietary goal. Now notice here, total vegetables. Now 90% of the population didn't meet the target. When it comes to fruits, 80% of the population did not meet the target. When it came to, this one here, refined grains, 95% of the population exceeded the target. Just in that simple graph, can you see one of the reasons why there's a health emergency, especially in the United States, but I'd argue Australia's not following far behind. Because we're not. As a population, we're not meeting the guidelines. The scary thing with the guidelines here, they've changed now, they're still scary. Do you know what recommended intake, numbers of portions of vegetables a day was... Well, first of all, do you know what the recommendation is in Australia? 5, excellent. So, and a portion is about the size that fits in the palm of your hand. That's the recommendation in Australia, that we have 5 portions of vegetables a day. And for fruit, it's 2 portions. Now, that's the minimum. I mean, we do better if we can do more than that. But in America, when these guys, when they found out that, 90% of people weren't meeting it, the recommendation was 2.5 serves a day. It's now gone up to 3. And you know what the reason given when they're asked, well, why is it that it's so low? They say, well, it's so low because we figure people are struggling to get to 2.5 or 3. If we made it too high, people would give up because it's too difficult. Amazing. Is it any wonder why we've got a health crisis? All right. Now, healthy eating. Let's go through some guidelines. Okay, first of all, we want plant-based because plant has the densest of and the broadest spectrum of various nutrients. So plant-based, in fact, a lot of the health gurus who used to be into, the high, keto stuff, a lot of them are actually changing their minds now. I get a lot of medical newsletters, and a lot of these guys are saying, hey, we actually want a well-balanced, plant-based food and nutrition because, you know what? In plants, you get hundreds of different phytonutrients. And you know what? In many ways, as we've said, the more the better. So a wide variety, especially vegetables and fruit, of minimum 5 portions of vegetables and 2 portions of fruit a day. Now, why is it? Now, here, the next point, we want to reduce animal products. Now, the reason is what we're finding is that if people certainly have a lot of them, it does increase to inflammation and there's chronic diseases which actually increase. So certain animal fats, etc., will increase risk of different cancers, heart disease, etc. And so the studies now are showing more and more that if we can tend towards plant-based rather than animal-based, then the point is it does actually promote health span and also longevity as well. Minimally processed, we've kind of touched on that as well. We want to minimise unhealthy fats, sugars and other toxins. Healthy preparation methods, that's an interesting one. Because, the typical Aussie barbecue, what happens if we barbecue something and it becomes charcoal? Well, do you recognise what's on there? Well, do you think your stomach recognises? So it goes into your body and it was a protein or it was a fat. It was something before you burnt it, but then it goes into your body and your body has to work out what to do with it. Because what is this thing? You break it down, you digest it, and what's this goop? Well, anyway, your body has to work hard to then detoxify it and eliminate it because you sure know that it's not going to be anything healthy for the cell. And that's why we've got to be careful is that, to look at healthy preparation methods because we want to actually optimise what we're putting into our body that it can actually feed our cell, not be something that is a burden. It's the same problem with processed food because, and you've heard of the term junk food, right? So what's junk food? One of the definitions is it's something that actually depletes your body more by having to process it than what you actually put in with the food. So think about it. When you eat something, not only you've got your gastric juices, you have to digest it. After that, it has to be absorbed. It then has to be detoxified in your liver or your kidney. It has to be eliminated. It all takes energy. It all takes other nutrients, other vitamins and minerals to do it. Now, if you take something that doesn't add anything to your body, but at the same time it's got to take up what you've got in order to process it and eliminate it, well, you're worse off afterwards than you were when you started. And so that's one of the definitions of junk food. It actually depletes you rather than adds nutritious things to you. And unfortunately, we could probably name a few, well-known establishments that give you fast food that might be in that basket. But I won't do that. But you want the healthy preparation methods. Eat in moderation, because if we don't? Well, that's what we've got the risk, haven't we, of overweight and obesity as well. Appropriate spacing in meals. We could speak a lot about that. It used to be thought that if we ate lots of little meals during the day, that would be fantastic. But we don't. We know that's not the case anymore. And one of the reasons is that we have our gut microbiome. So you know how in our gut we have good and bad bacteria. Now, we want the good ones, because what do the good ones do? It's not only the bacteria, they give off products called metabolites, and those are absorbed into the body, and the good ones actually do good things in your body. In fact, there's also a connection between your stomach and also your brain, and vice versa. It's through the vagus nerve. You might have heard of the vagus nerve. Now, the thing is, if you have a healthy gut microbiome, it's going to more likely be that you have positive moods, emotions, less anxiety, less depression. You're going to feel better, and that can be just based on some of the stuff that you eat. It can have a big difference. So we want healthier rather than unhealthy. So the quality of the food that we eat will make a difference in our microbiome, but also, interestingly, the spacing of meals. I remember going to a seminar where there was a gastroenterologist based in Melbourne, and he was doing research in this area, and he said he had started eating 2 meals a day. Now, that may not be for everybody, I'm not suggesting that, but for some people it could be, and certainly intermittent fasting can be useful, because he said as we give our stomachs a break from the intake of food, and it might be 16 hours, it might be 18 hours, intermittent fasting, during that time, the longer we fast, the more our healthy bacteria thrive, and the bad ones, they actually don't do so well, and so the good ones take over. But if we eat small meals all the time, we're feeding the bad ones, they will take over, and the good ones actually struggle. So we actually want to not make sure we're eating all the time. Not only does it promote, I guess, overweight and obesity, but if we can space our meals further apart. So that's what breakfast is about. So, you know, we want to break our fast, but if you have breakfast, then you might have an early dinner. You don't want to eat 10 or 11 o'clock at night and then get up in the morning and eat 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning and then eat throughout the day. You're not giving your digestive tract some time to actually take a break and for your good bacteria to proliferate. So that's an interesting one. The other thing which I should have mentioned about why a wide variety of plants is so important is why? Because in plants you have these phytonutrients. And a particular vegetable, for example, might have hundreds of them, if not even thousands. And we don't know what all of them do yet. A lot of them haven't been studied in detail. So this particular vegetable might have hundreds. Now, you have a second vegetable. It also has hundreds. There is some overlap, but they have some new unique ones. And so you do the third one and the fourth one and so on. And so I've been to one nutritional seminar where they're saying, look, do the more you can, even if you can do 10 different ones. Well, it's going to actually add health to do it, prepared, in a healthy way, etc., etc. Now, recognising there are some people who have allergies or sensitivities. If there's a particular plant that doesn't agree with you, you don't keep forcing it. You can go to practitioners who will do testing for sensitivities, etc. But if there's a particular food doesn't agree with you, well, look, there's many others that you can try, and you can find a range of foods that actually do agree with you. So I think that's important, because some people will keep trying. Well, they're told this particular vegetable is good for you, and they keep taking it, but they feel sick on it. Well, no. If it makes you feel sick, just step back, try something different. All right. Hydration. We could talk so much about hydration. As a population, we're chronically dehydrated. I don't know, we just, and as we get older, our thirst mechanism doesn't work so well. And so what we find is that we're just not drinking enough. I find this a lot in aged care. And look, even, I guess I don't feel old yet, but look, there's a temptation now. You just keep going further in the day and you get busy. Oh no, I'm too busy, but you've got to force yourself to drink and you feel better. There was a study done, some years ago now. They had 3 groups. They were on a treadmill. I don't know, I guess they get these volunteers. I don't know if they have to pay them or something, but anyway, they get these volunteers to go on a treadmill. The first group, they all had to walk as far as they could on the treadmill. The first group, they were told they had to walk, but they were given no water, even if they were thirsty. Now, they walked a certain distance and they stopped. The second group, they were told, well, you've got to keep walking, but you know what? You can have water. If ever you're thirsty, whenever you want to, there's water here, you can drink it. Well, guess what? Do you reckon they went further? Yeah, they did. Yeah, that actually went quite a bit further. The third group, they had calculated how much water they needed for replacement, and they said, we've got to walk, but you've got to drink this water when we tell you whether you want it or not. Well, that group, they had to stop the study because they kept going and going. Now, I'm I'm sure eventually they would have run out of puff. But the point is, it illustrates that even if we think that we're having enough water, often we're not. Now, there are some occasions where we shouldn't have water. If our doctor tells us because, of health reasons, be it, sodium levels or kidney, disease, whatever. If your doctor says limit your water intake, of course, there's reasons for that. For most people, you need to make sure you've got enough. Now, you can tell by just checking the colour of urine. It needs to be just pale, right? If it's very dark and concentrated, unless you're taking, B group vitamins or something, then in most cases you're most likely to be dehydrated. I mean, look, there are sticks you can get and they can test specific gravity. For most people, you don't need to do that. You can just tell by the colour. And you know what? If you then have enough water for a period of time, there's often ailments that actually improve. Sometimes people get chronic headaches just because they're chronically dehydrated. Sometimes aches and pains. Sometimes energy levels. There's all sorts of things that can improve if hydration is improved. All right, there's so much we could talk about there. But and supplements, look, sometimes they're essential. Look, particularly in aged care, I will test people for things like iron and B12 and vitamin D and things like that. And you'll be surprised how often people are low in those. And if that's the case, well, look, get those things tested with your doctor. And if you're low, look, sometimes supplements can be very helpful. Okay, so we can talk about those. All right, now we've got a race through. That's the first one, but nutrition always takes the longest. Physical activity will go fast, right? Now, now we also use the word movement because exercise, like I say, because most of us grew up in an era where it was all about the gym and it was no pain, no gain era. You had to be tough. Well, we know that that's not the way to do it these days. Now, this was in the Journal of Nutrition, Health and Ageing only last year. A global consensus on optimal exercise recommendations for enhancing healthy longevity in older adults. Well, that's right on topic for what we're talking about today. And they said, look, physical activity and exercise can prevent or ameliorate lifestyle-related diseases, extend health span, enhance physical function, and reduce the burden of non-communicable chronic diseases, including cardiometabolic disease, cancer, musculoskeletal and neurological conditions, and chronic respiratory diseases, as well as premature mortality. Well, that's a pretty impressive list. What do you reckon? So physical activity is a good thing. They go on and says physical activity influences the cellular and molecular drivers of biological ageing, slowing ageing rates, a foundational aspect of geroscience. Thus, PA or physical activity serves both as preventive medicine and therapeutic agent in pathological states. In other words, exercise is great for you. It helps prevent disease, and if you've got disease, it helps you manage that disease. So it's actually a good thing all round. Now, benefits of movement. I'm going to go through these very, very quickly, but these are just some, and there's always more. It's kind of like the steak knives, right? Strength, balance, muscle tone, endurance, improved circulation, nutrient delivery, detox, decreased blood pressure, decreased depression, improved sleep, brain protection, increased brain function, weight loss, and there's more. Decreased risk of heart disease, cancer and diabetes, reduction in pain, improved sense of well-being, energy and vitality, slower ageing. I know, have I sold exercise yet? What do you reckon? I'm trying. I know, sometimes it's a hard sell, but the science is very clear that these studies are showing that it makes a massive difference. Now, what are some of the principles of movement? Well, it's not just cardio, because people think, you've got to go run or you've got to walk or something. Now, those are good, but there's also strength. Now, does anyone know what the Australian health recommendations are for physical activity in terms of both, I guess, cardio, but also in strength? Does anyone know? Well, in terms of the duration, 150 minutes of moderate intensive exercise a week. So what's that? It's approximately 20 minutes a day if you add it up. And moderate intensity, it's so that you're walking at a steady pace, or if you're jogging, but it's so you can still speak in a sentence. You're not completely puffed. If you can't speak, well, that's more likely to be rated as vigorous exercise. And by the way, that's 75 minutes of that, if anyone can do that a week. But 150 for moderate level activity, that's a recommendation. The other one is 2 sessions of strength training a week. And strength training is something we don't really talk about. But it's very important as we get older. I see it all the time, because if you don't have that strength, the falls risks in aged care centres is one of the major issues. Instability and falls, and people fall and they break arms, they break their hips, sometimes they have massive head strikes and injuries. It's catastrophic, but you know what? If you then have strength training, the studies are very clear that it helps to prevent falls, because you can have better mobility and better control of your mobility. So these are important. Now, flexibility and posture, look, they're important things as well. Intentional versus incidental. Now, you don't have to do a block of 30 minutes in one time. If you do, fantastic. But if you walk an extra 100 metres to the shops because all the tourists are in town, and you have to walk that far further anyway, but you know what I mean. Even if there's not tourists in town, I don't know when low season is, but whenever that is, maybe it's too hot, I don't know. But you don't want to get heat exhaustion either. But the thing is, find ways where you can do more activity and you can walk further. Or, gardening is one of those things, housework. Look, my wife's listening, she's going to get me to do more housework, and she's waving to me, hello. But the point is, these things add up. So you do 2 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 10 minutes. Before you know it, and if you do it at moderate intensity, you've got your time. Isn't that a good thing? So, we don't have to be somehow stressed, I don't have a half-hour block where I'm going to do it. Just be active, move. Regular, yes. Variety, yes. Frequency, duration, intensity, yeah. Look, we've spoken about that. Now, a pre-exercise health check. Now, this one is important, because why? You don't want to get a heart attack. You don't want to get all of a sudden excited and say, I'm going to do it. And next thing, you go out there and do an intense burst of exercise, end up in the local hospital because you get chest pains. Now, there was a guy, by the way, who actually wanted to do that intentionally. He actually he was in his 50s, he was depressed. He basically then decided, well, hey, I don't want to be here anymore, so I'm going to make it look like an accident. I'm going to go for a run, and I'm going to have a heart attack, and look, it's all sorted. Well, he tried that. But then he just got tired, and then he came home. He said, all right, that didn't work, I'm going to try it again the next day. So he tried the next day, it didn't work, but he found he went a bit further. He kept doing it every day. And before he knew it, after a couple of weeks, he thought, well, hey, I'm actually feeling much better, I'm going much further, I don't feel actually down or depressed, I feel good, I'm going to keep doing it. And so he did. He ended up becoming a guy who held various age records for running, as a senior, I think in his 60s and 70s. He became one of the most famous athletics coaches in history. You might have heard of his name. His name was Percy Cerruti, based in Melbourne. And he trained, he was a guy who was the coach for some of, and you probably heard some of the athletes he's coached, like John Landy, the first Australian to run the mile under 4 minutes. Herb Elliott, John Landy, who was a long distance runner, as well as many others. And so this is the thing. Now, look, I guess exercise would transformed his life. I'm not saying you all have to become, massive exercise enthusiasts. The point is, though, unlike him, I guess he did, it's not a direct comparison, but get a pre-exercise health check if you haven't done it for a while, to make sure you don't put yourself at risk of harm when that happens. All right, now sleep. Now, I always race the clock. Why? Because I get too enthusiastic about stuff, and I go down all sorts of pathways. It's okay. We'll get through. I'll just go a bit faster. All right, sleep. Now, you can tell what's wrong with that picture is that there's light. Okay, you actually want darkness. Now, sleep is important. Now, here's a few studies. The association between, this was in 2026, very recent, the BMC Geriatrics. Association between sleep duration and healthy ageing among older adults. Evidence from the behavioural risk factor surveillance system. Look, there's only one graph I want to show there, and that is that between 7 and 8 hours is the peak. Now, this is the odds ratio for healthy ageing. So you want to be up here. If you sleep between 7 and 8 hours, that's the best. You go too much less, the less the worse. And here, if you have too much more, often if there's too much sleep, it will often indicate maybe there's some sort of underlying health issue that needs to be sorted out. So there you go. You've got the graphs are that 7 to 8 hours a night is where the sweet spot is in terms of healthy ageing. Now, here's one. Impact of night shift work on telomere length and epigenetic age in older workers. So night shift, we're messing around with our body clock. And so telomere length, I mean, that's our cells have these bits. Every time our cell divides, a little bit breaks off. And so the longer these are, the healthier, the younger we are biologically. And so what these guys found was that current night shift workers exhibited significantly shorter telomeres. Now, shorter is worse, right? You want longer is better. So those who are current night shift workers, significantly shorter telomeres compared to non-current shift workers. Among former shift workers, longer cumulative exposure was associated with reduced telomere length. In other words, the longer you did shift work, then the shorter they were. But the good news, at least, was, additionally, telomere length increased and accelerated ageing decreased with each year since the night shift cessation, respectively. So if you finish night shift and the longer since you've done a night shift, then the healthier you become and your body actually can rejuvenate, at least to some extent. So that's good news. Now, I get it. Look, sometimes there are seasons in life where we need to do night shift work. But the point is, look, if that's got to happen, it's got to happen. But look, if there can come a time you can move away from that, then the longer you can stop doing that, then the better it is for your healthier and ageing. Okay, so sleeping well. Well, we want a regular routine, ideally. Avoid screens for at least 90 minutes before bed. Now, there's probably two reasons. One is the blue light. It decreases our melatonin levels, our sleep hormone. The other thing is we probably get too worked up by the stuff that we're reading on the screens, right? And then we can't sleep. So eat at least 2 hours before bedtime. Some people say 3. In fact, my dad, who is 100 and still going well, he has some reflux issues, and he's got to be careful, because if he eats, in fact, less than 4 hours before bed, once he lies down, he can get reflux, and he's been in hospital with aspiration pneumonia, right? He gets treated with antibiotics, that's great, but you know what? To prevent that, he's actually got, but that's a particular issue. But still, even generally, what happens? Because if we eat and then we go straight to bed, well, we're not burning it up, we put on weight, then the blood goes in all the places not supposed to, then we have funny dreams, we have nightmares, we wake up in the morning, we're exhausted, and then the cycle starts again. So, so better to have an earlier, lighter dinner. So avoid stimulants, especially before bedtime. Keep active during the day. That's actually really helpful for sleep. Be exposed to bright light during the day. If you're exposed to morning sunlight, it helps to get the body's clock in sync. Get some light, it's morning light into your eyes. Consider your sleep environment. Noise issues, light issues, not too hot, not too cold, etc. So have the right sleep environment. Address underlying health issues. Look, if someone snores a lot, if you're told you snores, go to your doctor, get a sleep study. You might have obstructive sleep apnea. That's a significant health issue. You want to be able to, get that dealt with properly, and then you'll find your sleep quality increases a lot. Supplements, look, for some people they might be useful short term, but that's something to speak about with your health practitioner. So sleeping well, toxins. Now I'm going to go through this one very quickly, except for one aspect I said that I would mention. Because remember, we're not going to talk about never smoking. I think that one's self-evident. I'm not going to talk about opioid use disorder, because I think that's self-evident as well, but also that was in a veteran population, not in a general population. But I will speak briefly about alcohol. The World Health Organization in 2023 made the following statement. Alcohol is a toxic, psychoactive and dependence-producing substance and has been classified as a Group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer decades ago. This is the highest risk group, which also includes asbestos, radiation and tobacco. Alcohol causes at least 7 types of cancer, including the most common cancer types, such as bowel cancer and female breast cancer. Ethanol, alcohol, causes cancer through biological mechanisms as the compound breaks down in the body, which means that any beverage containing alcohol, regardless of its price and quality, poses a risk of developing cancer. And so that's the most recent, and it's not just the World Health Organization. Look, there are different bodies who are saying this, that there is no amount that is safe from the cancer perspective, and that any amount will increase, and obviously the more the increase of cancer, the risk of cancer, which is actually quite interesting. It's different, I think, from the messaging that we were getting a decade or two ago. The next one, this is a study I said about that was only just now, July 2026. Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs. And the title, Alcohol Intake and Health Study, No Protective Effect at Low Levels, with mortality increasing to 1 in 25 at 14 drinks per week. Now, 14 drinks per week is still considered to be a safe level for males in the United States. Now, in Australia, it's 10 a week is considered the cutoff, but here, what they found was that what mortality was 1 in 25, that's 4% at what? 14 drinks a week. And so when you look at, and sorry, the fine print is there, it's saying the alcohol intake and health study shows that for Americans, even what is socially considered moderate drinking increases the risk of dying or developing health problems, helping people better understand the net health impact of alcohol. Anyway, I won't go through the rest of it, but it's basically the reason for that study, it was trying to change the guidelines and saying we need to reduce the level that we consider safe drinking is at, because our guidelines at the moment are saying what we're saying is safe isn't really safe. Look, I'll go on to now we've got the last two. We're on the home run. We've got two left. Social connections, and of course the last one, stress management. So let's have a look. Social connections. Study from which year? 2024, World Psychiatry. Social connection as a critical factor for mental and physical health. Evidence, trends, challenges and future implications. Now, it says, robust evidence documents social connection factors as independent predictors of mental and physical health, with some of the strongest evidence on mortality. Did you get that last phrase? Some of the strongest. Now, you thought the stuff on nutrition and physical activity was pretty strong, right? Social connection, it's some of the strongest evidence of mortality. And this is recent. We weren't reading about this 10 or 15 years ago, but we're reading about it now in the last few years. Now, this is, I'll just briefly go through, this is a fascinating figure in this study. So it's got social connection. Now here we're talking about positive social connection, not toxic, as I mentioned before. So now social connection, it's got mechanisms, so psychological, it's biological, behavioural, things like stress, resilience, meaning, purpose, hopefulness, security, biological, inflammation, neuroendocrine factors, immune function, behavioural, physical activity, nutrition, sleep, smoking, medical adherence, risk-taking, violence, self-harm, etc. These are some of the... So you can see how it's bi-directional. So social connection directly impacts these various mechanisms of disease, and similarly, these mechanisms point back to the social as well. They work both ways. And notice here we've got another aspect which then means that all of these work across each other. The outcomes, illnesses. For example, coronary heart disease, stroke, diabetes, depression, anxiety, dementia, various causes of mortality, accidents, homicide, suicide, etc. So many different illnesses, many different causes of death have the social connection has a major impact through mechanisms that have been clearly described there in the middle. So this is it's not just a vague social connection. They've actually studied to say this makes a difference and this is why it makes a difference. So what does that mean? Look, we could talk a lot about connection, except I'll just make this observation. So what we want is positive connections. In fact, you know what it's like. I mean, you probably heard some wise people say, "Well, look, you know, people spend their whole lives ignoring, you know, their family, their relatives, connections, whatever, striving up the ladder of success, which usually means more and more money. At the end of it, they come to the end of it. They might have money, they might have lost it, or who knows what, and they find that those valuable things, the social connections in life, have not been nurtured, and they're fallen apart." And they might have achieved what they thought was success, but what ultimately was important, actually, they completely failed at. And that's a tragedy. Because the social connection, it's not just a matter of me and my health. It's a matter of, hey, I'm engaged with a group of people that I feel part of, that not only connected, but we have common meaning, we have common purpose. There is a connection there that matters. And that's why I think in terms of, you know, various communities, and I know there's the growth community. I mean, you guys meet, a lot of you meet monthly, and that's fantastic. You know, there are groups that meet weekly, like, you know, in this church. There are many community, family, social groups. Value those, prize them, and don't take them for granted, because they are important. Okay, the last one, stress management. Now, this is a study, stress management, dementia, and narrative review. This was published, I think, 2025, if I can read the fine print. Some of these are very small. Now, stress represents one of the most pervasive yet under-recognised threats to brain health across the human lifespan. The biological mechanisms are clear. Chronic stress triggers a cascade of harmful processes, including brain tissue loss, widespread inflammation, cellular damage and impaired blood flow to critical brain regions. Population-level evidence consistently demonstrates that individuals experiencing significant stress during middle age face substantially higher rates of cognitive decline and dementia in later years. So look after yourselves. Now, it doesn't mean, look, if you had a lot of stress in middle age, you know what, there's stuff you can do to still help that. It doesn't mean all is lost, but it means take the stress seriously now. But also, if you're in middle age, take it seriously then. If you're in young age, I mean, at any age. Look, I know there's seasons in life when stress is a natural part of what happens in life. But the point is there are things that we can do. We'll come to that. Now, the next one, all right. There we go. The link between chronic stress and accelerated ageing. This was a study from 2020. People exposed to chronic stress age rapidly. Now here we go, we speak about telomeres again. The telomeres in their cells of all types shorten faster. Inflammation is another important feature of stress that, along with ageing, accounts for the phenomenon of inflammaging. In addition to ageing itself, inflammaging can contribute to the development of several pathologies, including atherosclerosis, diabetes, hypertension, and others. Oxidative stress is one of the main mechanisms related to stress, and that's what it does. Now, here's another one. Molecular pathways linking chronic psychological stress to accelerated ageing. Mechanisms and intervention. This is a brand new study, February 2026. Okay, so we've got recent stuff. Now, this one here, notice this. Chronic psychological stress refers to repeated or prolonged exposure to adverse social or emotional threats that exceed an individual's adaptive capacity. Now, I think that's important because what someone sees as stressful, someone else might think that's easy. Or I can thrive on that. Some people, you look at people on television doing stuff, you think, I could never do that, and it's probably a good thing you probably don't do some of the things that they do. But for them, it may not be stressful, but for you, it would be damaging to your health from stress. Now, it is recognised as a risk factor for ageing-associated diseases. A growing body of research has shown that there is a link between chronic psychological stress and accelerated ageing. So, this is, and again, we didn't talk a lot about this, 10 or 20 years ago, but the studies now are coming out and they're showing this very clearly. Now, here we highlight recent findings on the interconnected relationship between chronic psychological stress and major ageing hallmarks, including mitochondrial dysfunction, telomere attrition, cellular senescence, that is cell death, epigenetic alterations, inflammation, and genomic instability. Now, we don't have time to go through what those are, but bottom line is that chronic stress can cause a whole bunch of different issues at the cellular level, and we're only just starting to appreciate what those are. Now, so what are some of the lifestyle factors in stress management? Now, just very briefly, I guess, because we've just about run out of time. Nutrition. Now, this is a funny thing. All the things that we've spoken about actually all work in together and help with this. So this will be a really fast section. Why? Because we've actually covered a lot of the things that actually help. So nutrition, physical activity, sleep. So I told you this one would be a bit faster. Social connection. Now, personal management skills is an interesting one. Now, one of the things, how sometimes, people talk about stress management. They talk about, you're taking, deep breathing or meditation or, there are different relaxation methods. Now, look, that's fine. They might help for now, but what we also want to address, sometimes there are foundational personal issues, in terms of management, personal management. It might be in terms of our priorities. It might be what we attribute meaning to in life. It might be that we know that there's a major issue that is boiling under the surface that we actually need to address and deal with, and until we do, no amount of deep breathing is actually going to make us ultimately better because we haven't addressed the underlying issues. So this is where, I don't want to give some sort of, flippant kind of recipe and say, just do this and it's going to manage your stress. Because we have to address what our own life issues are, what our, it might be difficulties, it might be the root cause of our stresses, and then, within family, within connection, within, within a context that is supportive, we need to then address those as well. And I want to make that point because it's too easy sometimes to gloss over that and not to then get to what sometimes are the core issues that might be causing our stress. Now, meditation is one of those, and some people do find that helpful. And of course, now, spiritual health. Now, we don't have time to talk a lot about that. Now, tomorrow we're going to unpack that in more detail and look at some of the really strong evidence that talks about this. But spiritual health, a lot of people find that in terms of the meaning and purpose and connection, etc., that they find it actually is very beneficial. See, the good book says in Proverbs 17, a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. See, if we have that cheerful spirit, you know what, a cheerful heart, it actually does help with stress. And we approach things with a mindset and an attitude that actually a lot of things we don't feel as stressed about as otherwise we might. Galatians 5 talks about the fruit of the Spirit, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness and self-control. And so these things here are really positive attributes. I don't think people are going to look at these and say, well, look, we don't want those. People want these things. But you know what? When these things are present, then it helps to address a lot of the issues that are stress. We can actually cope with stress much better when we've got this type of emotion and mindset. And so just one final study I'll have briefly, and this is one, the effect of prayer on mortality. Now this was an interesting one. It was in the Journal of Health and Religion in 2023. It was a frequency of private prayer predicts survival over 6 years in a nationwide US sample of individuals with a chronic disease. So it was a 6-year study, longitudinal study. Participants had at least one chronic illness. And the survey question was very simple. How often do you pray by yourself? Now, what they found was participants who prayed on a daily basis or more were significantly more likely to survive over the 6 years compared to those who prayed less often. Now, the hazard ratio was 1.48, so it means that they were almost 50% more likely to survive that 6 years than those who doesn't. And that's something, it's pretty simple, isn't it? It's like, I guess praying on just on a daily, sometimes more than daily, but something as simple as that can have a profound impact. And as part of that would be its impact on stress management and stress relief as well. That would be one of the mechanisms. I imagine there's a lot more, but still, that one is a really interesting study that I came across. And it's a recent one. It was only 2023. So, and that makes sense because those who pray very often, would pray to a God who they think is actually on their side, who loves them rather than who is antagonistic and wants the worst for them. And so John 3:16 is a well-known Bible text which says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." And this is where, for those who find comfort in this, that whole idea of something into the future that is good and positive with a God who actually loves us is something that actually decreases stress levels a lot with a lot of people. So again, what are the 8 lifestyle habits? Because we've done a whirlwind, haven't we, through them, all 8 of them. So nutrition, physical activity, restorative sleep, never smoking, no excess alcohol consumption, no opioid use disorder, social connections, and stress management. So we've covered a lot of material. Thank you for your patience. We've gone just a few minutes over time, so do apologise for that. But we have a few minutes now. Barb, I guess it's over you. How we can take some questions if people have some questions. How long do you think we've got to do that?